Hey family, it's Danielle, and today we're going to be discussing my thoughts and feelings on canceling curriculums for their lack of representation and inclusion of people of color, particularly Black people, and their whitewashing of Black history. So if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on this topic, I would love for you to stick around for the video. Be free. Into this video, if you're new here, hi, welcome. My name is Danielle and I am the non-traditional mommy, and on this channel we discuss homeschooling, parenting, marriage. We do vlogs and reviews, basically anything that pertains to life. So if any of that tickles your fancy and is of interest of yours, I would love for you to consider sticking around and joining my family. To the rest of my non-traditional family, you guys already know you are the MVPs and I love you bunches. Mwah. Now, let's talk about my thoughts and opinions on this whole cancel culture of curriculums that do not represent people of color and are whitewashing history. Okay guys, so a few disclosures before I jump into this video. My dog is barking like crazy. My brother is doing, I don't know, jitsu, something in the living room, and Kit clearly does not like it. So she's having a meltdown. So there's that. Second of all, I want to warn you guys that these opinions and my thoughts are coming from a non-religious person. So if you are not a person that is willing to hear other perspectives, open to other perspectives, can respect other perspectives, then this is the opportunity for you to quietly exit now. All right, now that we got those tiny little disclosures out the way, let's just dive in, you guys. There has been a lot of talk going on within the homeschool community and a lot of curriculums being exposed and canceled, for a lack of better words, for being non-inclusive, for people of color, particularly Black people, for whitewashing history, for overshadowing things that happened in history with a lot of Bible talk and Bible flair and things like that. And all of this seems to be just now coming to light or becoming new information for a lot of people. For me, this isn't necessarily new information. I always felt like a lot of these curriculums were non-inclusive. A lot of these curriculums may have had a little bit of underlying racism to them. If you look back at the history of homeschooling, it was founded by a liberal. It was all about liberation. Well, towards the late 1980s, early 1990s, it was taken over by evangelical and fundamentalist white Christians. So much so, they booted out one of the founders for not being Seventh-day Adventist enough. So that little tiny blip of history says to me that homeschooling was never really inclusive. It had a short lifespan of being inclusive. If you just take that into consideration, that little bit of history, it kind of tells you what the foundation of homeschooling was based on, right? So we'll come back to being non-religious. I want to start with being a Black homeschooler. I want to start there because I think that has evolved and that has changed over the years of me homeschooling. When I first started homeschooling, way back in 2005, I think it was, maybe 2006. Way back then when I first started homeschooling, there were very, very few Black homeschoolers in my area. I mean, very few. I felt isolated instantly when it came to that. A lot of times I would often find myself being the only Black family at homeschooling events, during homeschooling field trips. When I signed my kids up for homeschooling classes, we were typically the only Black families. However, we were always welcomed with open arms under the assumption that we were Christians, right? That was always the assumption. And at the time, we were Christians. So it wasn't that we were posing or pretending. At that time in my life, I had one foot in, one foot out of religion. I have been heavily religious for a very long time, met my husband in church. This is neither here nor there. But when I began my homeschooling journey, I was on a different path. God was leading my heart in a different direction. I was a Christian, but I was going in a different direction. But we'll get there in just a second. So anyway, despite the fact that we were the only Black family, we were always welcomed under the general umbrella and principle that we were all Christians. It was always assumed that I was homeschooling for religious purposes. It was always assumed that's why everybody homeschooled. When you would meet people, it would be, oh, hi, how are you? What does your husband do? What church do you go to? Those were like the questions that were asked, just under that general thought process of homeschooling. So because of this, because I was a new homeschooler, a lot of times any type of curriculum that was recommended to me, or when I would ask questions about certain things, it was always Christian-based curriculum. Things like Becca, My Father's World, Bob Jones, and the list just goes on and on, Apologia, and so forth and so on. And while I didn't use a lot of them, and I haven't used a lot of these curriculums, we did use Becca, Apologia, and My Father's World. I started with Becca, and I personally loved the ease of use of Becca. I loved how it was laid out. I love the skills, the skill building, the foundation, and things like that. I've done full reviews on Becca and my feelings and my opinions on that. However, despite this ease of use and the skills, I remember feeling this ickiness. I remember saying to my husband how there was a lack of representation of Black kids in the stories, and how when there was a Black child represented in the story, that would be the child that was getting in trouble in the narrative of the story. I remember us reading one story because they have readers, and there was a white Jesus and the children were at his feet, and the premises of the story was Jesus loved children and things like that. And I remember just feeling like this sense of, just chills going through my body of just, And I remember saying to my husband, I don't know, how this is going to work, how I'm going to continue to homeschool or use these curriculums if this is what it's going to be like. Just the total lack of representation and the references to Jesus being white and things like that were just, I was like, I just don't know how this is going to work. But despite all that, the skills that my kids were learning and the ease of use, it was working. And because I wasn't homeschooling my kids for religious reasons, I was able to see past those things. For me, homeschooling has been and always been about character building and my children being able to mature at a speed that I feel is appropriate for them, and for me to be able to introduce concepts and thoughts and things like that when I feel like they're ready to be introduced to them, and so that we could talk about things on a deeper level and they can explore and learn things outside of the box and all of that. These things in Becca and even in Apologia, when we later used that curriculum, it provided an opportunity for us to have conversations. Things like race and things like, is Jesus white? And all of those questions. When we used Apologia, the question of Adam and Eve were the first person, does that mean we're all related? Those kind of questions. We were able to discuss those things in further detail and explore all of the different thought processes and beliefs. So for me, I was able to see past that, but it also opened my eyes up to these curriculums and to the creators of these curriculums. It planted that seed of,
okay, I see where we're going here.
I knew I would never use these curriculums for history, because another one of my reasons for homeschooling was to teach my children all the richness of Black history, all of the beauty and the ugly of our history. I knew that I would have to teach that particular subject in a different way. I always knew I wouldn't do that with a standard curriculum. And after using Abeka for math and reading, I quickly knew that wasn't going to be the curriculum that I turned to for things like history. I never knew just how whitewashed and bad, for a lack of better words, that particular curriculum was when it came to history, because I didn't use it for that reason. It wasn't until now that all of these curriculums are being exposed and all of these things are starting to happen that I became aware and kind of privy to this information. Now, mind you, I used Abeka many years ago, and I have since then moved on from Abeka, and we no longer use it for math or reading either. I have found myself really far removed from that particular curriculum. As I began to move further and further away from Christianity, I became more and more turned off and almost repulsed by these Christian curriculums. And so here's where we go into being a non-religious homeschooler. Because being Black is one thing, but being non-religious, y'all, whoo, child, that's a whole different ball game. Because like I said earlier, being the only Black one, or being Black in homeschooling, we can see past that because we're all one big Christian family. It's easy to try to pretend or welcome me on the basis of Christianity, right? But as a non-religious homeschooler in the South, you are isolated, y'all. I mean, you are shunned and isolated. When I transitioned from religion, it became virtually almost impossible to find curriculums that were non-religious. So forget being inclusive for Blacks or people of color. Try being inclusive for all religions, right? Try being inclusive for all people. It almost became virtually impossible. And that's when I started going to more curriculum fairs and things like that, trying to seek secular curriculums, which is how I landed on Moving Beyond the Page, as well as ABC Darien and a few other curriculums that I have used along the way. So on top of trying to find inclusive curriculums for just representation, but trying to find curriculums that didn't shove Christianity down your throat was so hard that we did a whole year with no books. I did a video on that. And by no books, I mean without a curriculum. And you guys, that year was so freeing for us. During that year without books, we learned so much, you guys. It was so freeing, especially for me. I think for my kids, they were already there, but for me, it was freeing. We learned about astrology. My daughter went so head deep into astrology. She learned so much and how it plays such a huge part in what we do today and how we operate today and things like that. We just learned so much during that year. And that year without curriculums just freed me. It really did. It freed me to be able to think differently and to think outside the box. With that being said, what are my thoughts on the exposure of these curriculums? I think that for Black Christians, sometimes it takes them a little bit longer to recognize something about a curriculum, a person, a church, a situation, because a lot of times the Christianity part overshadows the lack of inclusion, right? So a Black person can go to a church that is predominantly white and maybe not notice the lack of inclusion, or maybe not notice the words that are being said in the sermon, or maybe not notice certain things about certain events, or just things like that, because it is overshadowed with the Bible talk, right? Whereas somebody like myself who is non-religious, it's very easy for me to pick up on, because you're not inclusive for other religions, or for people who are non-religious, or for people who are atheists, or for people who just think differently, right? Because you exclude all of this category of people, of course it's easy for me to see how you exclude Black people or just people of color in general. I feel like sometimes that's where the delay comes in when it comes to Black Christians realizing that something is not inclusive for Black people, if that makes sense. So here's my feelings. I personally feel like these things were not made for us. Homeschooling has changed and has grown tremendously. And now you have tons and tons and tons of Black homeschoolers. You have more and more non-religious homeschoolers. You have more and more people from different religions homeschooling. This thing is different. It's looking different. You cannot expect these people who created their curriculum for a certain type of person to adjust to what's going on over here. That to me is like somebody coming into your house and saying, you need to change this, and this to make me feel more comfortable. And it's like, no, you just don't need to come to my house. And so I feel the same way when it comes to these curriculums. Going to these founders and creators and saying, you need to be more inclusive. You need to have more representation. You need to stop whitewashing history. You need to acknowledge what has happened to Black people and to Native Americans. It's like, why? Just don't buy their curriculum. Like, it wasn't made for you. So just don't buy it. Don't give them your dollars. They don't want your dollars. Instead, how about you create your own curriculum? Or if you're not up to that, because some of us are just not up to that, how about we go support those who have created curriculums that are inclusive, that represents, that is fit for all religions? How about we go support those type of people, those curriculums, rather than begging and begging and begging and begging people to change to make us feel welcomed and comfortable, who don't want us to feel welcomed and comfortable? So for me, the moment I realized that I don't like how Abeka feels anymore, and it is not right for my family, I just walked away. I didn't write a letter to the writers or creators and demand they change. I didn't the whole cancel culture of that curriculum. If people ask me, I still tell them, Abeka, it's great if you want your child to be above grade level, because they're going to be when it comes to reading and math. It is laid out for you. If you are a parent who doesn't want to think, if you want to do school at home, Abeka is that curriculum. However, there is a huge lack of representation of Black people and Black children. It is heavily Christian based. So keep those things in mind. And that's it. That's my 2 cents on that. For me, is I know that, so now here's what I use. Instead of that, you can use this. My daughter said to me, why do people do that? Why do they take Cinderella and make her Black, or take Cocomelon and make him Black? Why don't we create our own Cinderella or our own Cocomelon, our own version of that? Doesn't have to even be the same, our own princess. Why do we ask, no, you need to make them this way, versus just creating our own? And I was like, there it is. There it is. There's hope. There's hope for the future generation. For example, I have talked about Goose Goose Duck a million times on my channel. If you haven't seen those videos, go check it out. But if you're looking for a Black curriculum that shows representation, that sings songs, that is so fun, that is geared towards preschoolers and younger age children, then try Goose Goose Duck. You don't have to go over here and do this, because there is a whole Black woman who has created a curriculum for us, right? For us, by us. This year for history, because I have a high schooler, we will be doing this history called Awoke History. I will leave it linked down below. Created by Black people, made for us. It is talking about all the depths of Black history. I cannot wait to use this curriculum, and I definitely will be doing a review over it for you guys. There's tons and tons of different things out there for us that was even created by us. When it comes to being non-religious, that's a little different. That's a little different. Because I have found curriculums that are more inclusive or have more representation. There's a science curriculum that was created by a Black female, but it's Christian-based. It's a Christian-based science. So again, there's that whole being non-religious puts you in a whole different kind of box, and you do have to search a little bit harder if you don't want any type of religion mixed into your curriculum. For me, I'm okay having religion in my curriculums because it provides conversation and opportunities for me and my kids to discuss religion, and for us to discuss all the different religions that are out there, and how one thinks this way, one thinks this way, here's how they think the same and really aren't that different, and all of those kind of things. So I'm okay using curriculums that have religion in them as long as they are inclusive and have representation, because I do think that's a different type of religious-based curriculum, although it's still not inclusive and doesn't have full representation. There's that. To sum all this up, my feelings is that with this whole cancel culture and exposure, I feel like it's okay to educate and to let people know, hey, here's what's going on with this particular curriculum. Here's what they've said, here's what they've done, and then leave it up to the people to decide how they want to spend their dollars. It's your money, it's your hard-earned money, so how you choose to spend it is how you choose to spend it. If you're a person that's like, I don't care, this curriculum's working for my kids, I'm going to continue to buy it, then great, do you. That's okay. But if you're a person that's like, hey, they don't want my money, I'm not giving them my money, then great, do that as well. I feel like, yes, educate the people, because like I said, for me, I wasn't privy to how some of these curriculums were when it came to history, because I've never used them. Educate, I think, is great. But then the whole cancel is kind of like, well, they didn't really want your dollars anyway. That curriculum wasn't necessarily made for you. So canceling them really does nothing, but maybe make you feel better in saying, I'm done, I'm canceling them. What are you guys' thoughts? What are you guys' thoughts on the exposure of curriculums that are not inclusive or have representation when it comes to people of color and Black people? What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on asking people to change, to incorporate other people, or for the comfortability of other people? What are you guys' thoughts on that? I would love to hear in the comments below. If you're still here, then you're part of the family now. So we want to welcome you with open arms and ask you to officially join the family by hitting the subscribe button. And if you decide not to join, at least give me a thumbs up because you made it this far. I would really appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching and for hanging out with me. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.